Atlanta Motor Speedway, Shane Van Gisbergen, believe it or not, actually not his first start in the Cup Series. Made a start back last fall in September at Atlanta Motor Speedway right after he was announced as the full-time driver of a Trackhouse car. Gave him some extra dates. Atlanta was one of them. He finished 32nd in that race. I think he got involved in a wreck if I remember correctly. But anyways, we're here to talk about today, or yesterday now. We're here to talk about Shane Van Gisbergen's first ever trip to Atlanta as a full-time Cup Series driver. That sounds better. So we're going to talk about his day. I got some notes here. I went back and watched the race replay on Max, HBO Max, whatever it's called now. And I watched his onboard, listened to his radio, how his day went. He led a couple of laps in this race, believe it or not. His first laps led of the 2025 season. And yeah, let's get into it. So he started this race in 30th. Once again, for the second straight week, we are at a super speedway. Now, Atlanta, should have done this earlier. This is during a live stream. So the new SVG segment is now on Mondays. We do it the day after the race because I have to focus on the main race itself, whereas Xfinity, I would focus mainly on SVG. But now I have to focus on the main race itself, so we do it on a Monday night live stream. We talk about the race, we talk about everything else, and I carve out about 15 to 20 minutes to talk about SVG. I cut that, I put some graphics on there, I put some video clips on there, and this is how we do it now. So if the audio is good this week, I hope it's good this week. I was told it was low last week, so I adjusted it, raised it up a little bit. So hopefully the audio is good this week. But yes, Atlanta Motor Speedway, it's a 1.5 mile racetrack. Technically, it's 1.54 miles, which is equivalent to 2.49, so about 2.5 kilometers. Very similar to Daytona, which is a 2.5 mile track, which I believe is like 5.2 kilometers or 4.02 kilometers, excuse me. So it's a much shorter track. It's a similar track in terms of the actual racing itself. We have the pack where it's a bunch of cars racing in a pack. There's about 20 to 30 cars within a second and a half of each other. One car goes spinning, the whole field wrecks. You guys all saw how that went at Daytona last week. Atlanta is a mini version of Daytona, so that means, you're turning the wheel a little bit tighter. You do actually have to lift off the gas a little bit. Now, you're not slamming on the brake, and honestly, some drivers don't even use the brake. It's a driver preference. You'll see some drivers let off the gas, and it's light, going from 100% throttle to 85% for about 2 seconds. Some drivers, they continue on full throttle, but they drag the brake. So they just kind of keep their foot on the brake for a little bit to get through the corner. There's a little bit more, I hate to say skill involved, but there's a little bit more skill needed in how you make your moves. Daytona and Talladega and this next gen car, you're not able to maneuver or make aggressive moves because you're not able to build up the run. Whereas at Atlanta, you're able to build up runs and you're able to pass people more frequently. You're able to run in all 3 lanes and weave your way through traffic in a sense. And also another great thing, you don't have to save fuel because, well, there's a lot of cautions and also just you can make it to the end the way things play out, and fuel saving, it's mentioned, but it's not as heavily emphasized. So anyways, for the second straight week at the Super Speedway, Trackhouse, not a great qualifying effort, but qualifying at these Super Speedways, it doesn't really mean anything. It's all about how the car handles in the pack. It's a completely different setup in a sense. He started 30th, and remember, as I said, he finished 32nd in his first ever Atlanta start. And a big thing about these Super Speedways is the spotter. Josh Williams, not the Xfinity driver. Don't get mixed up. There are 2 different Josh Williamses. But Josh Williams is the spotter for Shane Van Gisbergen this year, and they are ultra important at these super speedways. Josh Williams is obviously telling SVG who's around him. Car outside, car inside. You're in the middle of 3 wide. You got a car 1 car length behind you, coming up with a big run. He's about to hit your bumper really hard. Hold on for dear life. Or, hey, sometimes he relays information about what's happening in front. So when SVG is running 22nd, he's saying, hey, the high line, the top line has more cars. It has about 12 cars. The bottom has about 7. Top line might be preferred here. Or he's saying, hey, this car that you're about to hit, he doesn't handle pushing as well. So maybe don't hit him as hard. Or maybe he'll say the opposite. Hey, this car can take a push. Shove him. Get him out to the front of the field. So the spotter is going to not only relay information about what's directly happening around his driver's car, but he's also going to tell you about all the other things that are happening in the race. Is there a wreck in front of you? Is there a wreck behind you? What works good for other drivers that you think your driver can apply and use to better their position or better their race? So it was a pretty tame stage one. Not much to talk about here. SVG just kind of yo-yoed from about 18th to 33rd. He'd get up to, as I said, 18th, fall back to 24th, move up to 20th, fall back to 27th, up to 23rd, and just kind of shuffled from that region. And it's the tale of two races. I'll explain why, but the first half of the race, that was really the story. He was about 18th to 33rd, making some moves, making some fun moves, going with Ross Chastain, going with Daniel Suarez, his teammates, or going with another Chevy car, but not doing anything over aggressive and nothing crazy. It's just kind of where he was. Talked about how his car was tight. This was the majority of the race. It would just tighten up as the run went on. As I said, handling much more important at Atlanta than Talladega. Just you're driving the car a lot more at Atlanta than you are at Talladega and Daytona. So they finish up stage one. SVG ends up finishing, I think, 22nd or something. Let's see if I have it written down here. Okay, I don't have it written down, but I think it was around 22nd, let's call it. Maybe it was 23rd. But SVG finishes in the top 25, no stage points, but that's how it goes. And, well, yeah, nothing much. They end up making a pit stop, and at the end of the stage, SVG said, oh man, that's fun. And it wasn't like a sarcastic. He said that like he was really having fun in this race. As I said, he said that the car was tight, but he didn't want a big adjustment. He didn't want them to, throw the kitchen sink at it or anything. Just a little bit of an adjustment, help loosen him up. He didn't want to be overly loose. So they took 4 tires, filled it up on fuel. In fact, here's another little note. The crew chief, while he makes the strategy calls and the adjustments and all that stuff, he's also relaying information to Shane Van Gisbergen, or a crew chief to their driver, about what they can do better on their pit stop. And actually, SVG got some good information from crew chief Steven Duran here. SVG came into pit, and, Steven Duran's telling him, hey, here's who's in front of you in the pit box in front, pit box behind. And he said, hey, next time you pit, you went a little bit long in the box, a little bit too far, and also you were a little bit too close to the wall, made it difficult on the left side tire change. So next time, adjust that. It wasn't a big deal. We didn't lose a ton of time, but hey, just a note. And hey, I think he adjusted, but they end up restarting in 20th place at lap 82. He said the car still tight, and he said it was actually a little bit worse, but the race goes on. By the way, they have code words. I don't know what they mean, and I'm not trying to expose state secrets on here. It's public information if you get an HBO Max account. But SVG and Steven Duran, they were talking on the radio, and their code words are supercar and MotoGP. Obviously, Trackhouse owns a MotoGP team, and then Supercar, Shane Van Gisbergen used to drive supercars. Do I really need to say that? So anyways, this is the big moment of the race. 22 laps to go in the stage, 122 laps to go in the race, and SVG's pitting. Him, Ross Chastain, and a bunch of other people, they end up going to pit, and once again, they were running kind of in the back half of the teens or even in the 20s at times, but they go to pit, and this is a big deal, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. They take 4 tires and fuel, 22 to go in the stage. Not much time left in this stage, and they're trying to flip the strategy, trying to get better track position. Well, he restarts 26th place. He's 27th place when, with 9 laps to go in stage 2, there's a wreck, a multi-car pileup. By the way, SVG just missed out on this wreck by just a little bit, but hey, he missed the wreck, no damage. He's now in 27th, which I guess he fell back, but he made up a few spots because people wrecked, unfortunately. Now, with 4 laps to go, he's 17th on the restart because a few guys in front of him pitted. They just did what this whole group of cars with SVG did. And so now he ends up finishing the stage in 15th place. And as a result, a bunch of the rest of the field, basically, they now pit, which means Shane Van Gisbergen at the start of stage number 3, 4th place, P4. So he's got a good look at the front of the field. He's got his teammate Ross Chastain lined up in front of him. And what do they do on this restart? They jump out to the lead. Ross Chastain gets a good jump. Shane Van Gisbergen gives him a good push. And they run 1-2 for a solid 10 laps or so. Chastain led the majority, but then finally the field kind of started to get a little bit more organized. Kyle Busch got the top lane running. Ross Chastain had to go block it. And for a few laps here, Shane Van Gisbergen and Ross Chastain, they're running side by side for the lead. In fact, Shane Van Gisbergen led 2 laps. Let's go look at some statistics here. Scroll down here. Do you see this too? Shane Van Gisbergen led 2 whole laps. He has started off his laps led category in the 2025 statistic book. He has led 2 whole laps here in the 2025 season, and that's right before we get to a road course. Anyways, as I said, you follow your teammate on the choose, every restart, stuff like that, but he got to lead a couple of laps. There's another wreck at some point. He restarts second, 76 laps to go, and that was the peak of the race, really, for SVG. He led those couple laps, was running top 2 for 20 or so laps, let's call it. I don't know the exact number. But he said, hey, being out front was really nice. And this was right after they talked about, the car itself. So I don't know if he was saying the clean air felt really nice to drive in, or if he was saying, hey, it felt really nice to lead at some point on one of these ovals. Now at this point, as I said, it's about 76 laps to go that the caution fell. They pitted with about 70 to go, 71 to go. So at this point, everyone could pit 4 tires, get fuel, and you can make it to the end of the race on fuel. Now remember, I said that SVG and that group of cars, they pitted with 22 to go in stage number 2 for tires and fuel to flip the track position. Well, you got to remember, there was another group of cars who pitted about 15 laps later, and they filled up on fuel. And then there was that other group of cars who pitted 10 or so laps later to do the same thing. So while they flipped the track position, while they put themselves in a great place and they led a couple laps, they were up front, it didn't bite them because they ended up fighting back and getting back to the top 5, but they had to wait a little bit longer on fuel. They had to make sure that they could make it to the end while everyone else was able to make these shorter pit stops. And so SVG, it was not a slow pit stop. It wasn't a bad pit stop. It's just that they had to wait for the fuel to make sure they could make it to the end of the race. And they end up restarting in 10th. So they go from 2nd to 10th on that pit cycle purely because they needed fuel in the car. It's a pretty big necessity. Now, this next run, they kind of run from 5th to 12th. They fall, it's kind of like I said with the 18th to 33rd. He restarts 10th, makes his way up to 7th. Falls back to 11th, but all of a sudden he's back in the top 5. Okay, now he's back to 9th. It's just how these things go at super speedways. You yo-yo. So yeah, he was 10th place with 55 to go, and technical difficulties hit. For about 10 laps, I did not have the HBO Max live stream because it said, technical difficulties. We will get back to your event later. True story. It happened during the race, and I had to turn off HBO Max 3 times to make sure it worked, and, well, it finally ended up working. But as I said, he was running in that 5th to 12th range, and that slowly just kind of fell to 10th to 15th, 15th to 20th. And with 26 to go, there was a caution. He was running 19th place. He said 3 and 4 in reference to turns 3 and 4. His car was handling terrible. Still too tight. He wanted an adjustment, so they said, hey, bring it down to pit road. We'll put 4 tires on this thing, fill it up with fuel, and, or at least, get you a little bit more fuel to be safe. And then also we'll adjust the car to your liking. He was the first car on the field or on the track to pit, and he ended up leaving pit road first, so he didn't restart that far behind. He came in 19th and he restarted 21st because a couple cars behind him stayed out. So he didn't lose much track position, and he has fresher tires now. So anyways, he makes his way up a little bit. 19th, 16th, 15th, and he's running around 11th to 13th for the last 10 laps of this race. 2 laps to go, a lap and a half to go in this race, really. Austin Cindric goes spinning because Kyle Larson blocked him, and SVG is P11. He's 11th place. Great chance at a top 10 at an oval. He's had a really good day. He's led a couple laps. How is this thing going to end? It ended in the dirt. As these super speedways go, Shane Van Gisbergen, through no fault of his own, is running 10th, 11th, 12th, as I said, and the field starts wrecking in front of him. He has nowhere to go. Everyone starts wrecking. He was able to get back to the flag. He was able to finish the race, but he went from 11th, and as you can see here, he finished 23rd. So it was a really good day for him, honestly. A great learning experience, which is what this year is about. It's kind of like last year in Xfinity, but there will be times this year that it's all about learning. He got to lead a couple laps. He got to know what it's like to be up at the front of the field. Got to know what it's like to be in the top 5, top 10, mid-pack, and even, kind of near the back in the late 20s and the early 30s at times. So he got to know what it's like in every single part of the race, and even got some significant statistical additions with the 2 laps led. So, well, sure, the final result may be disappointing if you're an SVG fan, but you got to look at the positives. He led a couple of laps. He was up front at times. And at the end, that wreck wasn't his fault. He didn't trigger the wreck. It just happens at these super speedways. Someone triggers a wreck and you got nowhere to go, and someone wrecks you on accident. So currently, let's look at his point standing, and unfortunately, we have to scroll. 34th. So it's how the super speedways go. We see some other big names down here. I mean, Brad Keselowski's down here. Chase Briscoe has negative 51 points because they got a massive penalty. That's a different story, though. That has nothing to do with super speedways. But yeah, I mean, Jimmy Johnson's made 1 start, and he's still 24th in points. Good news for you SVG fans, but yeah, good news. Next week is a road course Circuit of the Americas. I will be there. I am excited to be there. I will let you guys know what I'm doing when we get closer to that time. Really excited for that race. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.